Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly analyze how Guardiola's tactics created issues for Nuno's Wolves. When we break down the game and we do look at the board, it should have been Wolves' 3-4-2-1 against Man City's 4-3-3. But when we look to break down how City were able to bypass Wolves' attempt to contain their attack, it did look like Wolves dropped off into a 5-4-1 where Neto at times was a bit higher and it could look like a 5-3-2, but it was more of a 5-4-1 against City's hybrid shape. City's overall attacking shape was more of a 3-1-4-2, but at times if Cancelo and Mahrez, who were responsible for holding the width on the touchline, pushed a bit higher, then it would look like more of a 3-1-2-4. Nevertheless, this game was about City getting overloads in wider positions, and initially it did look like they were aiming to dominate that left-hand side, and if they could shift Wolves towards that zone, then there was the ability to play quick switches out to Mahrez, breaking in behind Johnny. Laporte and Walker shifted into the half spaces to provide cover for Cancelo and Mahrez, and then De Bruyne and Bernardo were between the lines in the gaps between Semedo and Ruben Neves, and Moutinho and Neto. Up front, we ended up seeing Sterling occupying Dendoncker, but at times he was often in that position between Dendoncker and Coady, and then Gabriel Jesus would deal with Romain Saiz. What we saw from that front line was that Sterling and Jesus were dropping off deeper to receive the ball and look to drag out Wolves defenders out of position. But the reason why they were doing that was because Sterling would instantly drop into that zone and it would give him space to make darting runs in behind the Wolves backline rather than attempting to back into Dendoncker or Coady and spin across them. Out in the wider areas, Cancelo and Mahrez were pegging back Hoover and Johnny, but what was interesting about City was that De Bruyne and Bernardo Silva's movement was pivotal. Specifically down the left-hand side, you had De Bruyne often positioning himself ahead of Hoover, and then Dendoncker couldn't shift across due to Sterling's narrow position. That leaves the gap for Cancelo to push forward, unless Semedo drops off deeper. But initially in those earlier stages, you witnessed Laporte pushing forward, but if Semedo stepped forward to close him down, all Laporte had to do was slide the ball out to De Bruyne and then he would be able to play in Cancelo, or he'd slide the ball to Cancelo and then that would leave a gap for De Bruyne to run into unless Ruben Neves shift across. But what ended up happening was that Traore would be tasked with closing down Rodri, but if he didn't close down the deep-lying Manchester City midfielder, then Ruben Neves or Moutinho would step forward to close him down. And in the earlier stages of that game, Wolves were warned of the threat of Semedo stepping towards Laporte because Ruben Neves wasn't tracking the movement of De Bruyne. What we end up seeing is Laporte stepping towards half and splitting in advance Semedo and Ruben Neves for De Bruyne in space between the lines ahead of Hoover, who can't step because Cancelo's position on the touchline, and you can also see Sterling in a deeper position preparing to make a forward run. When De Bruyne receives the ball, he's closed by Ruben Neves and he instantly slides the ball wide to Cancelo on the touchline, and when Cancelo receives the ball, he pulls out Hoover, and that's when Sterling prepares to run into the Dendoncker-Coady gap to place himself in a legitimate goal-scoring position. And although Cancelo does well to bypass Hoover and Dendoncker for Sterling in left half space, from this position he's denied by the Wolves keeper. Following that attacking move, we witnessed Semedo dropping off deeper to allow Laporte time and space to push forward, but now his responsibility was to deal with the movement of De Bruyne because if Hoover gets pulled out by Cancelo, then that leaves a gap for De Bruyne to charge into to create opportunities for Sterling and Jesus breaking in towards the box. The other alternative for City here is that once Rodri began to receive space in and around that halfway circle, he began to drag out Ruben Neves, and now we ended up seeing De Bruyne dropping off into a deeper position to pull out Semedo, and then that created a gap for Cancelo to push forward due to Sterling occupying Hoover and Dendoncker. Here you could see Rodri pulling Ruben Neves towards the ball, and De Bruyne dropping into the halfway circle to drag away Semedo, as Sterling darts into the Hoover-Dendoncker gap to free up space for Cancelo. And then you could look to a time where Neto and Ruben Neves were pulled out by Rodri, and De Bruyne drags Semedo into the halfway circle, and as he received Mahrez's squared pass, he hits a first-time ball into an unmarked Cancelo with Sterling occupying Hoover. Ultimately, the issue that City had was although they were creating space down that left-hand side for Cancelo to push forward, Hoover did a very good job of shifting across to close him down, and Cancelo failed to beat the Wolves' right wing back in 1v1s down that side. Meanwhile, when you look to the right-hand side, what you ended up seeing was that, similar to the left, if Walker could pull out Neto, then that's where you would see Johnny sticking towards Mahrez, and Bernardo would have space to run beyond Moutinho, who wasn't tracking his movement, into the space down the right channel. The issue that Wolves had there was that Gabriel Jesus was often occupying Roman Saiz, and that would allow Bernardo space to break towards the Wolves box, pull out Saiz, and then leave Gabriel Jesus goal side with Conor Coady. But the contrast between Mahrez and Cancelo's movement was that while Cancelo was looking to receive the ball down the left touchline, Mahrez was looking to break into space beyond Johnny to get into a good goal scoring position. And that's why the movement down Wolves' left side was pivotal. If Cancelo could drag out Hoover and De Bruyne could pull out Semedo, you have Sterling occupying Dendoncker and Coady, Saiz being occupied by Gabriel Jesus, and because Ruben Neves and Moutinho were occupied by Rodri due to Traore's inability to track him, then that leaves Bernardo the space to pull out Johnny, and that's where you could see City looking to quickly shift out play and play in Mahrez in behind the Wolves backline. The other issue that Wolves encountered down City's right-hand side was, unlike Semedo, who tracked the movement of De Bruyne, they weren't getting that same defensive work rate from Neto or Traore to make up for Moutinho's inability to track the movement of Bernardo. So if you have City overloading that left-hand side, Bernardo's positioning does pull out Johnny, and it allows space for Mahrez to push into. We witnessed this in the build-up to City's opening goal, as Rodri pulls out Ruben Neves when he receives Kevin De Bruyne's pass back, and that's where you see Bernardo shifting laterally into space ahead of Johnny. And the issue that Wolves encounter here is that Adama's not stepping towards Kyle Walker, so he should be dropping off to deal with Bernardo so Johnny could focus on Mahrez, or they need Saiz to step towards Bernardo and Coady to shift across to Gabriel Jesus. Meanwhile, when we shift to the second half, we did see some slight modifications from Guardiola. When we look to the left, with Wolves looking to chase the game, Semedo was more insistent on stepping towards Laporte, and that created more space, like I said, for De Bruyne to challenge Ruben Neves to pick him out, and that's how De Bruyne played a key role in those early stages of that second half, as Cancelo held the touchline to pull out Hoover. Cancelo closed by Hoover and Semedo in the left channel, with Sterling occupying Dendoncker. Meanwhile, De Bruyne is unmarked beyond a ball-watching Ruben Neves. When Cancelo plays the ball into Sterling, he takes Dendoncker out of the game, which creates a large gap of space for De Bruyne to burst into, with Coady beginning to shift across for cover. Coady's pressure forces De Bruyne to keep the ball on his left foot, but the Belgians still force Rui Patricio into a difficult save. If we look to one final example, it's Laporte sliding the ball across Semedo for Cancelo to pull out Hoover, and you could see an unmarked De Bruyne beginning to push forward in the final third to the right of Moutinho. Cancelo carries the ball across Hoover, and that's where you see De Bruyne running across the right wing back, while Sterling made a run between Coady and Dendoncker in left half space, and as you could see, Moutinho isn't tracking De Bruyne's run. Cancelo's pass into the Hoover-Dendoncker gap places De Bruyne in left half space, as Sterling acknowledged he was offside, but even from here they failed to touch Rui Patricio. Whereas when we look to the right-hand side, although Walker wasn't pushing higher up the pitch initially, Bernardo was looking to receive that ball in the Moutinho-Neto gap when Neto stepped forward to close down Walker, or on the outside of Neto or Traore to receive the ball to run at Johnny and Saiz. Initially, it's De Bruyne from a deep central position, sliding the ball into the large Ruben Neves Neto gap for Bernardo Silva in a pocket of space. Bernardo Silva carries the ball towards the Wolves penalty area to pull Saiz, Johnny, and Ruben Neves out of the game before sliding the ball wide to Mahrez, and Bernardo Silva's continued forward movement drags Saiz towards the 6-yard box, and Ruben Neves is forced to monitor De Bruyne approaching the penalty area, thus resulting in a 1v1 with Mahrez and Johnny that forces the Wolves keeper into a quality save. Shortly after that, it's Ruben Diaz sliding the ball across Adama, who looks prepared to step to Walker, for Bernardo Silva shifting into an inside right position with space to run towards goal, as Hoover monitors Mahrez. Bernardo carries the ball towards the stepping Saiz and Hoover as Mahrez maintains his position towards the right touchline, and that's where Bernardo is able to split Hoover and Saiz for Gabriel Jesus running across Coady into right half space. And while Bernardo's pass places Jesus in this position against Rui Patricio, again the Wolves goalkeeper kept his side in the game, granted Jesus' effort was from a tight angle. And if we look to one final example, it's Sterling receiving De Bruyne's pullback across Ruben Neves and Semedo, and he shifts the ball out to an unmarked Bernardo Silva in right half space, with Mahrez in a deeper inside right position, with Mahrez unmarked in a deeper inside right position with Fabio Silva and Adama caught higher up the pitch. When Bernardo receives the ball, he's approached by Hoover, while Laporte shifts towards Coady, which frees up space for Saiz to cover. But Mahrez's threat is significant on the right side as he begins to make an overlapping run into half space. And when Mahrez receives Bernardo's pass, he plays a low-fizzed ball that bypasses Saiz into the path of Sterling running across Coady in the 6-yard box, but his backheeled effort flies inches wide of the far post. However, as City looked to chase the game, what we ended up seeing was that Walker began to push forward higher up the pitch to make overlapping runs beyond Mahrez, and because Neto, Fabio Silva, and Adama were tracking those runs, City were able to create overloads to play Walker into advanced positions and allow Mahrez to cut onto his left foot to attempt to find Jesus and Sterling in legitimate goal-scoring areas. But when we look to the build-up to City's winner, you end up seeing Mahrez ahead of Ruben Neves, splitting Neto and Hoover for Walker breaking beyond the Wolves' backline into right half space. As you can see in that zone, it is 4v3 with De Bruyne shifting ahead of Hoover and Bernardo Silva initially ahead of Neto. And ultimately, it was Mahrez's pass that placed Walker into this position in right half space to deliver the low fizz ball into the 6-yard box that fell to Gabriel Jesus to kill off the game. Hi everybody, thanks for watching and subscribe here for your latest tactical analysis and daily commentary on the InnerViews show. And if that wasn't enough, don't forget you could find more organic, unfiltered soccer/football analysis on the InnerViews podcast, the best soccer/football podcast in the world, available on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and any Android apps on your Android devices.